August 2nd, 2023, 6:47 in the morning, Naval Base, San Diego. The gates are just opening to the morning shift. Sailors in service dress white stream through security checkpoints with coffee cups and backpacks. Another Tuesday at America's largest naval installation on the West Coast. But this Tuesday is different. 57 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and Naval Criminal Investigative Service officers surrounded the base perimeter. They were waiting for one specific sailor to arrive. This was 22-year-old machinist mate 3rd class Jin Chao Wei, also known as Patrick Wei. He drove through the main gate at 6:54 in the morning in his personal vehicle. He showed his military identification. The guard waved him through. Wei did not notice the black sport utility vehicles parked in unusual positions near Pier 2. He did not see the plainclothes agents speaking into concealed radios. He parked his car in the enlisted lot. He grabbed his duty bag. He started walking toward the United States ship Essex. This was the amphibious assault ship where he had been stationed since March 4th, 2022. 7:03 in the morning, Wei approached the gangway of the Essex. The ship towered above him, 844 feet of American naval power. He was 10 steps from boarding when FBI Special Agent Christine Morrison appeared directly in front of him. She announced that federal agents were present. She then informed Jin Chao Wei that he was under arrest for espionage. 4 agents moved in simultaneously. Wei's hands went behind his back. The handcuffs clicked closed. His duty bag dropped to the pier. Morrison told him that for the next 18 months, he had sold classified United States Navy information to a Chinese intelligence officer. Wei's face went completely white. He knew exactly what she was talking about. 6 hours later, Wei sat in an FBI interrogation room in downtown San Diego. He sat across from 2 special agents and a Naval Criminal Investigative Service investigator. They asked him to describe his relationship with the Chinese contact he referred to as Big Brother Andy. Wei stared at the table for 43 seconds of silence. Then he looked up at the agents. His voice was barely a whisper. He said it was espionage. He confirmed that this was indeed espionage. One of the agents asked him to repeat that. Wei spoke louder this time. Wei stated he was in trouble. He admitted that he knew he was in a difficult situation. That admission would become the centerpiece of the government's case. But how did a 22-year-old Navy machinist end up selling secrets to China? He was making approximately $55,000 a year at the time. The secrets were sold for a fraction of his annual salary. How did a young man who swore an oath to defend the United States decide this? He chose to betray every sailor who served alongside him on the Essex. This betrayal was for $12,000. The answer began not in San Diego, but thousands of miles away. It began in the country where Jin Chao Wei was born. Wei came into the world in China, though the specific city had never been publicly disclosed. He spent his childhood and teenage years there before immigrating to the United States. The details of when he arrived and under what circumstances remained murky. These details were protected by privacy laws and the classified nature of his eventual case. What was known was that Wei harbored ambitions of American citizenship and American opportunity. He saw the United States military as a pathway to both. In 2021, at age 20, Wei enlisted in the United States Navy. He chose the Machinist's Mate rating, a technical specialty. This specialty would give him access to the heart of Navy vessels. These were the engineering spaces where propulsion systems, desalination equipment, and auxiliary machinery kept warships operational. The Navy sent Wei to basic training at Recruit Training Command, Great Lakes in Illinois. He completed the 8-week program without incident. Then came Machinist's Mate A school. There, sailors learned the fundamentals of operating and maintaining steam-powered and gas turbine propulsion plants. They also learned about auxiliary equipment and outside machinery systems. Wei proved himself competent at the technical work. He understood pumps, valves, boilers, and reduction gears. The Navy promoted him to Machinist's Mate 3rd class. This was an E4 pay grade that came with modest responsibility. It also came with the $55,000 annual salary. This amount would seem so inadequate when measured against his growing financial needs. On March 4th, 2022, Wei received his first permanent duty station assignment. The Navy ordered him to report to the United States ship Essex, hull number LHD-2. It was homeported at Naval Base, San Diego, California. The Essex was an amphibious assault ship of the Wasp class. It operated as a miniature aircraft carrier. It was capable of launching helicopters, Harrier jets, and more recently F-35B Lightning, 2 stealth fighters. The ship measured 844 feet long with a beam of 106 feet. It displaced more than 40,000 tons fully loaded. The Essex served as the cornerstone of amphibious ready groups. It projected American power across the world's oceans. This was done by delivering Marines to hostile shores with air support and naval gunfire. For a machinist's mate, assignment to a ship like the Essex meant access to virtually every mechanical system aboard. Way would work in engineering spaces that housed the ship's 2 combustion engineering boilers. These boilers produced 600 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. He would maintain the 2 geared steam turbines generating 70,000 shaft horsepower. These drove the Essex's twin screws to speeds exceeding 22 knots. His security clearance, granted as part of his technical rating, gave him access to technical manuals. It also gave him access to maintenance procedures and operational information. This information detailed exactly how one of America's most capable warships functioned at every level. Way reported aboard the Essex in early March of 2022. He began settling into the rhythm of shipboard life. He stood watches in the engineering spaces, performed preventive maintenance on pumps and valves, and participated in damage control drills. His supervisors found him generally competent at his assigned duties, neither outstanding nor problematic. He lived in enlisted berthing spaces deep in the ship's hull, sharing a compartment with dozens of other junior sailors. Off-duty, Way lived in base housing or rental apartments in the San Diego area. He was single, with no dependents. His $55,000 salary covered basic expenses. However, it left little room for luxuries. By all outward appearances, Petty Officer 3rd Class Jin Chao Wei was an ordinary junior sailor. He was learning his trade aboard a Navy warship. But Wei was about to make a decision that would destroy his naval career, his freedom, and his adopted country's trust. The decision began with a message on social media. February 2022. Wei had been aboard the Essex for less than 2 weeks. He then received an unexpected contact on a Chinese social media platform. The specific platform had never been publicly identified. However, court documents confirmed it was one of the major Chinese language social networking sites. The person reaching out identified himself as a naval enthusiast, someone deeply interested in warships and maritime technology. He told Wei he admired the U.S. Navy. He wanted to learn more about American naval vessels from someone with inside knowledge. The initial messages seemed innocuous, friendly inquiries about what it was like to serve on a ship like the Essex. Wei responded to the messages. Perhaps he was flattered by the attention, perhaps he was lonely, far from family, and struggling to adjust to military life. Perhaps he was simply naive about the security implications of discussing his work with strangers online. Whatever his reasoning, Wei engaged in conversation with the man who called himself a naval enthusiast. The exchanges continued for days, then weeks. The questions became more specific. What weapons systems did the Essex carry? How many Marines could it transport? What was the ship's maximum speed? Wei answered these questions, believing them to be general knowledge, the kind of information any interested person might ask. But the questions kept coming, and they grew increasingly detailed. The naval enthusiast wanted to know about maintenance schedules, propulsion systems, damage control procedures. He asked Wei if he could provide photographs of different areas of the ship. Then, in late February or early March of 2022, the man made his real intentions clear. The naval enthusiast was not a curious civilian admirer of warships. He was an intelligence officer working for the People's Republic of China. The friendly inquiries had been a recruiting pitch. Now came the actual proposition. The officer wanted Wei to provide classified information about the United States ship Essex and other Navy vessels. In exchange, he would pay Wei money. The amounts discussed were not enormous. Nothing that would make Wei wealthy was offered, but for a junior sailor struggling to make ends meet, a few $1,000s seemed like easy money. He was making $55,000 a year at the time. Wei made his choice. He agreed to the arrangement. He would become a spy for China. The officer gave Wei specific instructions on how they would communicate going forward. They would use encrypted messaging applications to cover their tracks. Wei would create multiple online accounts using different names. The officer provided Wei with a computer and a phone specifically for their communications. These devices could not be traced back to Wei's official identity. Wei was instructed to use digital dead drops. These were secure methods of transferring files that would not leave obvious trails. The officer told Wei to never discuss their relationship with anyone. If they needed to refer to each other in any intercepted communication, Wei should call the officer Big Brother Andy. Wei complied with all these instructions. The operational security measures were not sophisticated by professional intelligence standards. However, they were enough to give Wei and his handler a false sense of security. The betrayal had begun. March 2022, Wei started small, testing the waters of espionage. He sent his Chinese handler photographs of the Essex taken from the pier and from various locations aboard the ship. These images showed the vessel's exterior, its flight deck configuration, the arrangement of weapons systems on the superstructure. Big Brother Andy confirmed receipt of the photos and expressed satisfaction with them. A payment followed. It was likely transferred through one of the anonymous online accounts Wei had established. The amount was modest, perhaps a few $100s. However, it represented Wei's first payment for betraying his country. Emboldened by the successful transaction, Wei continued providing information. He sent videos of the ship at sea. This included footage of flight operations with helicopters taking off and landing on the deck. He also sent images of Marines conducting training exercises aboard the vessel. Each piece of intelligence earned him another payment. The money arrived regularly, reinforcing Wei's decision to continue the espionage. But Big Brother Andy wanted more than photographs and videos. He wanted technical documentation. In June of 2022, the intelligence officer made a specific request. He asked Wei to provide technical and mechanical manuals for the Essex and similar amphibious assault ships. These manuals contained detailed information about how the ship's systems operated. This information would be invaluable to any adversary. It would help them understand the capabilities and vulnerabilities of American warships. Wei had access to exactly the kind of manuals Big Brother Andy wanted. As a machinist's mate with a security clearance, Wei could access technical publications. These publications were stored in the ship's engineering spaces and in restricted computer systems. These manuals covered basic maintenance procedures. They also included detailed schematics of propulsion systems, electrical distribution, and damage control equipment. Auxiliary machinery information was also present. Many documents carried export control warnings. These notices stated the information was subject to the International Traffic in Arms regulations. It could not be shared with foreign nationals without explicit government approval. Wei knew these warnings. He had been trained on operational security and the proper handling of sensitive information. Every page of restricted technical documentation reminded him that unauthorized disclosure could harm national security. He provided the documents anyway. On or around June 5th, 2022, Wei sent approximately 30 technical and mechanical manuals to his Chinese handler. These manuals detailed the operations of multiple systems aboard the United States ship Essex. They also covered similar Wasp-class amphibious assault ships. The information included details about power generation and steering mechanisms. It also described aircraft and deck elevators. Damage and casualty control procedures were included. The manuals described how to operate the ship's propulsion plant. They detailed how to maintain auxiliary systems. They also explained how to respond to mechanical failures and combat damage. Some documents contained engineering drawings. These drawings showed the physical layout of machinery spaces. They also mapped the routing of critical systems throughout the vessel. This was not general information that might appear in public sources. This was technical data that only someone with authorized access could obtain. Big Brother Andy reviewed the 30 manuals Wei had provided. 10 days after receiving them, he sent Wei a message. He confirmed that at least 10 of the manuals were particularly useful to him. Those 10 documents alone contained information that would help Chinese naval architects and military planners. This information helped them understand American amphibious warfare capabilities at a granular level. For this batch of 30 manuals, Big Brother Andy paid Wei $5,000. The payment arrived through Wei's covert online accounts. This was the largest single sum Wei had received so far in his espionage career. $5,000 was the price for betraying critical information about American warships. Wei accepted the money without apparent hesitation. He was fully committed now to his role as a Chinese intelligence asset. The $5,000 payment represented nearly 10% of Wei's annual United States Navy salary. For a junior enlisted sailor living from paycheck to paycheck, it must have seemed like a windfall. However, the transaction also locked Wei into a pattern he could not easily escape. Having accepted substantial payment for classified information, he was now vulnerable to blackmail if he tried to stop. Big Brother Andy owned him. The intelligence officer kept making requests. In late June 2022, he asked Wei for information about an upcoming international maritime warfare exercise. The officer wanted to know how many United States Marines would participate. He also asked what kind of training they would conduct. Finally, he inquired about what military equipment would be involved. This request demonstrated how Chinese intelligence was using Wei not just to understand American ship capabilities, they also used him to gain tactical intelligence about current operations. Wei complied with the request. He sent multiple photographs of military equipment being prepared for the exercise. He provided details about Marine training activities planned for the operation. Each piece of information gave Chinese intelligence officers a clearer picture of American military readiness and tactical procedures. The payments continued. By the end of June 2022, Wei had earned several $1,000s beyond the initial $5,000 for the technical manuals. However, Big Brother Andy was not satisfied. He wanted more documentation. In August 2022, the intelligence officer requested additional technical manuals. Wei went back to the restricted computer systems and pulled another batch of documents. This time he sent 26 technical and mechanical manuals. These manuals related to the power structure and operation of the Essex and similar ships. Like the first batch, these manuals carried explicit warnings that the information was technical data subject to export controls. The United States Navy also deemed this information critical technology. The August batch of 26 manuals expanded the scope of information Wei had compromised. These documents covered power generation systems in greater detail. They also detailed electrical distribution networks, auxiliary machinery operations, and emergency procedures. They explained how the ship generated and distributed electricity to every compartment and system. They also explained how backup power systems functioned when primary systems failed. Furthermore, they detailed how damage control teams would respond to fires, flooding, or combat. Damage affecting critical machinery. For Chinese military planners, this information was gold. It revealed exactly how American amphibious assault ships could be disabled by targeting specific systems. It also showed how long it would take crews to restore functionality after damage. Moreover, it highlighted what redundancies existed in critical systems. Wei received another payment for the August delivery, likely around $1,200. This amount was based on the pattern of payments documented in his case. The money kept flowing into his covert accounts. By September of 2022, Wei had earned more than $7,000 from his espionage activities. However, the most sensitive documents were yet to come. In October 2022, Big Brother Andy made a new request. This request crossed into even more restricted territory. The intelligence officer wanted a technical manual describing the layout and location of specific departments aboard the Essex. These departments included berthing quarters and weapons systems. More specifically, he requested a weapons control systems manual for the Essex and similar ships. This manual would explain how the ship's defensive and offensive weapons were integrated. It would also detail how fire control systems tracked and engaged threats. Furthermore, it would show how different weapons platforms communicated with each other and with the ship's Combat Information Center. A weapons control systems manual represents some of the most closely guarded technical information on any warship. It reveals capabilities and limitations that an adversary could exploit in combat. The manual Wei sent to his Chinese handler contained export-controlled data. This data could not be exported without a license from the United States government. The International Traffic in Arms regulations explicitly covered this type of documentation. Wei knew he was violating federal law by transmitting this manual to a foreign intelligence officer. He sent it anyway. The Chinese officer confirmed receipt and expressed satisfaction with the information. Another payment followed, adding to Wei's growing pile of betrayal money. Throughout the remainder of 2022 and into 2023, Wei continued his espionage activities. The intelligence officer made regular requests for information, and Wei complied with nearly all of them. The exchanges followed a consistent pattern. Big Brother Andy would send Wei a specific intelligence requirement. Wei would gather the requested information from restricted systems aboard the Essex or from his knowledge of ship operations. He would photograph documents or download files. He would then transfer them to his covert communication devices. Using encrypted messaging applications, he would send the information to Big Brother Andy through digital dead drops or direct transfers. The Chinese officer would confirm receipt and often comment on the usefulness of what Wei had provided. Within days or weeks, a payment would appear in one of Wei's online accounts. The amount varied based on the sensitivity and volume of information Wei had provided. Payments ranged from a few hundred to several $1,000s per transaction. Wei systematically deleted his communications with Big Brother Andy to avoid leaving evidence on his devices. The officer had instructed him to maintain this operational security. He was told to never let anyone discover their relationship. Wei believed he was being careful. He thought the encryption and the multiple accounts would protect him. He was wrong. Wei confided in at least one other person about his espionage activities. Court documents reveal that Wei told another United States Navy sailor that he had been asked to spy for the Chinese government. The conversation likely happened early in Wei's relationship with Big Brother Andy. Perhaps Wei was still conflicted about the decision he was making. Wei apparently wanted to tell someone to share the burden, or perhaps to rationalize his choice. The other sailor's response is not documented in public records. However, that sailor did not report Wei to Navy authorities. Whether out of misplaced loyalty to a shipmate or fear of getting involved, the other sailor stayed silent. That silence allowed Wei to continue betraying his country for another year. Meanwhile, Wei's mother back in China learned about his espionage work. Prosecutors would later reveal in court filings that Wei's mother actively encouraged him to continue spying for the Chinese government. She told her son that providing information to Chinese intelligence could help him secure a future job with the Chinese government. Rather than being horrified that her son was committing espionage against his adopted country, she saw it as a career opportunity. This detail paints a troubling picture of Wei's motivations and influences. He was not acting entirely alone. He had encouragement from family and at least tacit acceptance from a fellow sailor who knew what he was doing. In early 2023, the intelligence officer made additional requests related to the Essex's ongoing overhaul and upgrade schedule. The ship was undergoing modifications and repairs. Big Brother Andy wanted detailed information about the work being done. He specifically requested blueprints, particularly those related to modifications to the flight deck. This deck is where aircraft landed and took off. Wei provided information about the repairs the Essex was undergoing. He sent details about mechanical problems discovered during the overhaul process. He shared information about issues affecting similar vessels in the amphibious assault ship class. This operational intelligence would help Chinese planners understand the maintenance challenges. It also helped them understand reliability issues that affected American amphibious warfare capabilities. Every piece of information Wei provided made it easier for potential adversaries to understand American naval strengths and weaknesses. The Chinese intelligence apparatus was systematically building a comprehensive technical and operational picture. This picture was of one of America's most important classes of warships. Petty Officer 3rd Class Jin Chao Wei was the source feeding that picture. He provided one classified document at a time. By August of 2023, Wei had been engaged in espionage for 18 months. He had passed hundreds of pages of technical documentation. He also provided dozens of photographs and videos. Finally, he gave detailed operational information about the United States ship Essex and other Navy ships. In return, he had received more than $12,000 in payments. $12,000. This amount was less than a quarter of his annual Navy salary. That was the price of Wei's loyalty to the United States. But while Wei thought he was operating undetected, carefully covering his tracks with encryption and operational security measures, he was wrong. Someone was watching. The investigation that would lead to Wei's arrest began months before the 2nd of August, 2023. The exact trigger for the investigation remains classified. However, federal investigators became aware that an active duty sailor stationed at Naval Base San Diego was in unauthorized contact with foreign intelligence operatives. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service opened a joint counterintelligence investigation. They obtained surveillance authority through the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court. This allowed them to monitor Wei's electronic communications and financial transactions. What investigators discovered confirmed their worst suspicions. Wei was actively engaged in espionage, systematically betraying Navy. Secrets to China. The surveillance operation expanded. Investigators documented every communication between Wei and his handler. They tracked the payments flowing into Wei's accounts. They identified the specific documents Wei had compromised. The case they built was methodical and overwhelming. By July of 2023, investigators had seen enough. They had documented a clear pattern of espionage spanning 18 months. They had evidence of Wei receiving payments in exchange for classified information. They had intercepts of communications between Wei and Big Brother Andy discussing operational security and methods to avoid detection. The United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of California convened a federal grand jury. Prosecutors presented the evidence investigators had gathered. Around late July of 2023, the grand jury returned an indictment. This indictment charged Jinchao Wei with conspiracy to commit espionage and related offenses. The indictment remained sealed for several days while investigators prepared to arrest Wei. This is standard procedure in espionage cases. Authorities want to ensure the suspect does not flee or destroy evidence once he learns he has been charged. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Naval Criminal Investigative Service coordinated the arrest operation. They decided to take Wei into custody when he reported for duty aboard the United States ship Essex. This ensured he would be in a controlled environment, surrounded by federal agents, and unable to escape. The 2nd of August, 2023. The arrest operation proceeded exactly as planned. Wei arrived at Naval Base San Diego, unaware that his espionage activities had been discovered. He parked his car and walked toward his ship. He was just another sailor reporting for another day of work. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Christine Morrison and her team moved in at exactly 7:03 in the morning. Wei was arrested without incident. He did not resist. He did not try to run. The shock and fear on his face told investigators everything they needed to know. Wei understood immediately why he was being arrested. Later that morning, Wei sat across from federal investigators in a secure interrogation room. He had been read his Miranda rights and advised of the charges against him. The agents gave him an opportunity to explain himself, to tell his side of the story. Wei did not try to deny what he had done. When asked to describe his actions involving the Chinese intelligence officer, Wei responded with a single word. That word was espionage. Then Wei added that he was in trouble. Those words would haunt him throughout the legal proceedings that followed. Wei made his first appearance in federal court in San Diego on the 3rd of August, 2023. The United States Attorney's Office unsealed the indictment and held a press conference to announce the charges. United States Attorney Randy Grossman stood at a podium. He delivered a statement that captured the severity of Wei's betrayal. Grossman stated that they entrusted members of the military with tremendous responsibility and great faith. He added that the nation's safety and security were in their hands. Grossman warned that when a soldier or sailor chooses cash over country and hands over national defense information, it is an ultimate act of betrayal. He affirmed that the United States would aggressively investigate and prosecute such actions. Special Agent in Charge Bryce Miller of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service Office of Special Projects added his own statement. Miller stated that Petty Officer Wei, as a service member, had been trusted with the nation's secrets. He was accused of selling out his country and betraying his oath to the Navy. This involved willingly providing sensitive military information to a Chinese intelligence officer for his own financial gain. Miller affirmed that the Naval Criminal Investigative Service would continue to leverage its unique law enforcement and counterintelligence authorities. This was to aggressively root out those who put the nation's warfighters at risk. The announcement sent shockwaves through Naval Base San Diego and the wider military community. Espionage charges under Title 18, United States Code, Section 794, are exceptionally rare. That statute addresses conspiracy to communicate, deliver, or transmit defense information to aid a foreign government. It had only been charged 5 times in the 6 years preceding Wei's indictment. The statute is reserved for the most serious circumstances. These involve the passage of national defense information intended to harm the United States or benefit a foreign power. Wei faced life in prison if convicted. In the months following his arrest, Wei remained in federal custody without bail. Prosecutors argued successfully that he represented a flight risk and a danger to national security. His initial court appearances focused on procedural matters and the review of discovery evidence. The government began turning over a massive amount of surveillance evidence to Wei's defense team. This included communications, intercepts, and financial records gathered during the investigation. Wei's defense attorney, Sean Jones, faced a nearly impossible task. The evidence against his client was overwhelming. Wei's own admissions during the post-arrest interrogation would be devastating at trial. The documented communications with Big Brother Andy left little room for alternative explanations. Jones would later tell reporters that Wei had made numerous errors in judgment. He asserted that Wei was young and naive and regrettably agreed to share some very low-level information in exchange for easy money. But prosecutors viewed the case very differently. Assistant United States Attorney John Parmley and trial attorney Adam Berry prepared their case with meticulous attention to detail. They were from the National Security Division's Counterintelligence and Export Control Section. They would argue that Wei's actions represented a calculated and sustained betrayal. This betrayal lasted 18 months and compromised some of the Navy's most sensitive technical information. This was not a single mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was systematic espionage. In March of 2024, prosecutors filed additional charges in a superseding indictment. The new charges included violations of the Arms Export Control Act. They alleged that Wei had conspired with his Chinese handler to export certain technical information. This information required a license from the Department of State. That law prohibits individuals from willfully exporting technical data related to defense articles without proper authorization. The government had evidence that Wei conspired with Big Brother Andy to export technical information that absolutely required export licensing. Wei now faced 7 counts in total. 2 counts of espionage were under Title 18, United States Code, Section 794. There was 1 count of conspiracy to commit espionage. 4 counts related to conspiring to violate and actually violating the Arms Export Control Act. Each espionage count carried a maximum penalty of life in prison. Each Arms Export Control Act violation carried a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison and a $1 million fine. If convicted on all counts, Wei faced the prospect of dying in federal prison. The stakes could not have been higher. As 2024 progressed, both sides prepared for trial. Defense attorneys sought to suppress certain evidence. They argued that Wei's statements during the post-arrest interrogation should be excluded. Those motions were denied. The trial date was set for August of 2025, more than 2 years after Wei's arrest. The delay reflected the complexity of the case. It also accounted for the volume of classified evidence that needed to be reviewed through secure procedures. The 13th of August, 2025. The trial of United States versus Jinchao Wei began in federal court in San Diego before Judge Marilyn L. Huff. The courtroom was packed with media representatives. Current and former military personnel were also present. Members of the public were fascinated by the rare espionage trial. Jury selection had been completed the previous day. 12 jurors and several alternates were sworn to decide Wei's fate. Wei sat at the defense table wearing civilian clothes, a white shirt, and dark trousers. He appeared younger than his 25 years, thin and nervous. His attorney, Sean Jones, sat beside him, legal pads stacked in front of them. At the prosecution table, Assistant United States Attorney John Parmley and trial attorney Adam Berry organized their exhibits. They then prepared to present the government's case. Parmley stood to deliver the opening statement. He approached the jury box and made eye contact with each juror before he began speaking. Parmley began by addressing the jury. He stated that the case was about betrayal. He explained that it concerned a United States Navy sailor who took an oath to protect and defend this country. That sailor then sold Navy secrets to China for $12,000. Parmley outlined the evidence the jury would hear over the coming days. He described how Wei had been approached on social media by someone claiming to be a naval enthusiast. Parmley described how that person was actually a Chinese intelligence officer. He further described how Wei agreed to provide classified information in exchange for money. Parmley explained how Wei called his handler Big Brother Andy. Wei used encrypted applications and burner devices to hide their communications. He also detailed how Wei provided dozens of technical manuals, hundreds of photographs, videos, and detailed operational information about the United States ship Essex and other Navy vessels. Parmley reiterated that the sum was $12,000. That is what he sold out his country for. Sean Jones rose to deliver the defense opening statement. He did not dispute the basic facts of what Wei had done. He could not. The evidence was too strong. Instead, Jones tried to reframe Wei's actions. He presented them as the mistakes of a naive young man. This young man did not fully understand the consequences of his choices. "My client made errors in judgment," Jones told the jury. "He was young and he was naive. He regrettably agreed to share some very low-level information. This was in exchange for what seemed like easy money." Jones argued that Wei never intended to harm the United States. He claimed the information Wei shared consisted primarily of outdated maintenance manuals. These manuals were for a broken and obsolete steam-powered ship. He suggested that Wei believed he was selling the information for the personal or professional benefit of the recipient. He argued it was not necessarily for the benefit of the Chinese government. Jones's opening statement faced a fundamental problem. Wei's own words contradicted the defense narrative. When Federal Bureau of Investigation agents asked Wei to describe his actions, he responded with a single word. He said, "espionage." That admission would echo throughout the trial. The prosecution called its first witnesses. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Christine Morrison took the stand. She described the investigation that led to Wei's arrest. She detailed the surveillance operation. This included monitoring Wei's communications with his Chinese handler. It also involved tracking payments into Wei's covert accounts. She explained how investigators had documented Wei's systematic compromise of classified information. This occurred over an 18-month period. Under cross-examination, Morrison acknowledged that Wei had cooperated to some degree after his arrest. However, she emphasized that his cooperation came only after he realized the overwhelming evidence against him. The trial continued through 4 more days of testimony and argument. The prosecution methodically presented the evidence. Naval Criminal Investigative Service Special Agent Thomas Richardson testified. He spoke about the technical nature of the manuals Wei had provided to his Chinese handler. Richardson was an expert in naval engineering systems. He explained to the jury what each manual contained. He also explained why that information was sensitive. The manuals were not outdated or obsolete, as the defense had suggested. They detailed current systems and procedures used throughout the Navy's amphibious warfare fleet. A foreign adversary could use this information to target vulnerabilities. They could understand how to disable critical systems. They could also develop countermeasures against American capabilities. The jury saw photographs of the USS Essex. They saw the weapon systems Wei had documented. They reviewed communications between Wei and Big Brother Andy. In these messages, the intelligence officer gave Wei specific intelligence requirements. Wei acknowledged these requests. They saw payment records. These records showed money flowing into Wei's accounts within days or weeks after he provided classified information. The prosecution played audio recordings of the post-arrest interrogation. The jury heard Wei's voice on the tape. He responded to the Federal Bureau of Investigation agent's question. Wei then said the word espionage. He added that he was in trouble. The courtroom was silent as those words played. Several jurors looked directly at Wei, who stared down at the defense table. Prosecutors introduced evidence of Wei's conversations with his mother. His mother had encouraged him to continue spying for China. They showed the jury how Wei had told another sailor about being asked to spy. This demonstrated that he knew exactly what he was doing. He continued with his actions anyway. The defense put on a limited case. Sean Jones called a few witnesses. They testified about Wei's character. They described him as a quiet, generally reliable sailor. He had not caused problems before his arrest. But character testimony could not overcome the evidence of what Wei had actually done. Jones attempted to argue that the information Wei provided was less sensitive than prosecutors claimed. He argued that much of it could be found through open sources. He also claimed it was not particularly valuable to Chinese intelligence. This argument did not gain traction. The prosecution's rebuttal witnesses made this clear. The technical manuals Wei provided contained information not available through any public source. The level of detail would be enormously valuable to any foreign intelligence service. This service would be trying to understand American naval capabilities. On the fifth day of trial, both sides presented closing arguments. Trial attorney Adam Berry delivered the government's closing statement. He stood before the jury and pointed at Wei. Jinchao Wei's allegiance was to Jinchao Wei, Berry told the jury. He took an oath to defend this country. He was given a security clearance. He was entrusted with access to sensitive information about our nation's warships, and he sold that information to China for $12,000. Berry walked the jury through the elements of each charge. He showed how the evidence proved every element beyond a reasonable doubt. He emphasized Wei's own admission. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents asked Wei to describe what he had done. Wei said one word. He stated, espionage. That was because Wei knew exactly what he was doing, Berry told the jury. He was not naive. He was not confused. He was committing espionage. Sean Jones delivered the defense closing argument with visible strain. He asked the jury to consider Wei's youth. He asked them to consider his lack of criminal history. He also asked them to consider his apparent remorse. He argued that the government had overcharged the case. He claimed some of the information Wei provided did not meet the legal definition of national defense information. This information required the highest level of protection. It was a difficult argument to make. Wei had provided dozens of export-controlled technical manuals. These manuals were clearly marked with warnings. The warnings were about their classification and handling requirements. He had received thousands of dollars in payments from a Chinese intelligence officer. He had used encryption and operational security measures specifically designed to hide what he was doing. The facts pointed in only one direction. Judge Huff instructed the jury on the law. She explained the elements of each charge. She also explained the burden of proof. Finally, she explained the definitions of key legal terms. At 3:27 in the afternoon on August 19th, 2025, the jury retired to deliberate. They deliberated for approximately 3 hours that Tuesday afternoon. They did so without reaching a verdict. Court recessed for the evening. The jury returned Wednesday morning, August 20th, at 9 in the morning. They then resumed deliberations. At 11:43 in the morning, after approximately 7 total hours of deliberation, the jury sent a note to Judge Huff. They had reached a verdict. Court reconvened at noon. The courtroom was packed. Wei sat at the defense table, hands folded in front of him. His face was pale. The jury filed into the jury box. None of them looked at Wei. Defense attorneys know this usually means bad news for the defendant. Judge Huff addressed the jury foreperson. She asked if the jury had reached a verdict. The foreperson replied that they had reached a verdict, Your Honor. The clerk took the verdict forms and handed them to Judge Huff. She reviewed them silently. Her face revealed nothing. She handed the forms back to the clerk. The clerk read the verdicts aloud. On count 1, conspiracy to commit espionage, the jury found the defendant Jinchao Wei guilty. On count 2, espionage, the jury found the defendant Jinchao Wei guilty. On count 3, conspiracy to export defense articles without a license, the jury found the defendant Jinchao Wei guilty. On count 4, export of defense articles without a license, the jury found the defendant Jinchao Wei guilty. On count 5, conspiracy to export defense articles without a license, the jury found the defendant Jinchao Wei guilty. On count 6, export of defense articles without a license, the jury found the defendant Jinchao Wei guilty. Wei had been convicted on 6 of 7 counts. Only one of the Arms Export Control Act charges resulted in acquittal. This was likely due to some technical distinction in the evidence for that particular count. However, the 2 espionage convictions and the 4 remaining export control convictions were more than enough. These convictions would put Wei in prison for the rest of his life. Wei sat motionless as the verdicts were read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. In the gallery, Navy personnel who had attended the trial looked satisfied. Justice was being served. After the jury was excused, Judge Huff addressed Wei directly. She informed him that he would remain in federal custody pending sentencing. His sentencing hearing was scheduled for December 1st, 2025. This was approximately 3.5 months away. That hearing would determine exactly how many decades Wei would spend in federal prison. The United States Attorney's Office issued a statement immediately after the verdict. Assistant Attorney General for National Security John A. Eisenberg made a statement. He said the defendant took an oath to protect our nation. The defendant was also entrusted with a security clearance as a petty officer in the United States Navy. Despite this, he sold out his country for $12,000. He violated his oath. He betrayed his uniform and fellow sailors. He also turned his back on his adopted nation for money. This verdict serves as a warning. It is for those who do not take seriously the solemn obligations of their positions of trust. It is also for those who do not take seriously their duty to this nation. Do not be tempted by easy money. You will be prosecuted and sent to prison. United States Attorney Adam Gordon for the Southern District of California added his own statement. Gordon stated that the defendant's actions represented an egregious betrayal of trust. This trust was placed in him as a member of the United States military. By trading military secrets to the People's Republic of China for cash, he jeopardized the lives of his fellow sailors. He also jeopardized the security of the entire nation and its allies. The jury's verdict serves as a crucial reminder that the Department of Justice will vigorously prosecute traitors. Federal Bureau of Investigation Assistant Director Roman Rajavsky emphasized the broader implications of Wei's case. He was from the Counterintelligence Division. Rajavsky said that Jinchao Wei swore oaths to become a United States Navy sailor. He also swore oaths to become a United States citizen. He then committed espionage. He did this by sending photographs and videos of United States Navy vessels. He also sent ship movement information, technical manuals, and weapons capabilities to a Chinese intelligence officer. China continues to aggressively target United States military members. This includes those with and without clearances. This guilty verdict shows that the Federal Bureau of Investigation and its partners will aggressively investigate. They will also hold accountable anyone who threatens United States national security. We encourage past and present United States government personnel to beware of anyone offering to pay for their information or opinions. We also encourage them to report any suspicious contacts to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That last statement highlighted what counterintelligence officials view as a growing threat. Wei's case is part of a broader pattern of Chinese intelligence operations. These operations target United States military personnel. They do this through social media and online platforms. The approach that ensnared Wei has been used successfully. This approach involves initial contact by someone claiming to be a casual enthusiast. This is then followed by gradual recruitment into actual espionage. Chinese intelligence has used this method against multiple American service members. Investigators and prosecutors in Wei's case referred to this methodology as virtual espionage. This practice involves foreign intelligence officers using social media. They use social media to identify, target, and recruit sources. This is all done without ever meeting them in person. The technique exploits the natural human desire for recognition and extra income. This is particularly true among junior military personnel. They may often feel underappreciated and financially stretched. Wei's defense attorney Sean Jones issued a statement. He expressed disappointment with the verdict, but attempted to minimize the damage. Jones said it was never disputed that Jinchao made numerous errors in judgment. He was young and naive. Regrettably, he agreed to share some very low-level information in exchange for easy money. Jones maintained that Wei loves America and has no allegiance to China. He believed he was selling the information for the apparent personal or professional benefit of the recipient. He did not believe he was selling it for the benefit of China. Jones argued that the information Wei sold consisted of outdated maintenance manuals. These manuals belonged to a broken and obsolete steam-powered ship. Jones expressed hope that Wei would receive a fair sentence, given the substantial mitigating factors. The statement rang hollow to most observers. Wei had been convicted by a jury that heard all the evidence. The jury did not accept the defense narrative. His own admission that he committed espionage contradicted claims that he did not understand what he was doing. The payment structure, the operational security measures, and the 18 months of sustained activity all pointed to deliberate espionage. These were not naive mistakes. As Wei was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs to be returned to federal custody, the consequences of his choices were clear. He would spend December 1st awaiting the judge's decision on his sentence. Federal sentencing guidelines for espionage and export control violations suggest Wei faces decades in prison. He could potentially face life without possibility of parole. This reflected the severity and duration of his betrayal. The Wei case represents far more than the criminal prosecution of one wayward sailor. It illuminates the ongoing counterintelligence threat that China poses to American military and technological secrets. Court documents and investigative reports reveal that Chinese intelligence services have successfully recruited multiple United States service members in recent years. They used similar techniques. Another Navy petty officer, Wenheng Zhao, was charged with sharing classified information with Chinese intelligence officers. This case was announced on the same day as Wei's initial indictment in August 2023. Zhao was 26 years old at the time of his arrest. He had accepted bribes to provide sensitive information about United States military installations and operations. Zhao eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 27 months in federal prison. This occurred in January 2024. The sentence was relatively lenient compared to what Wei faces. Zhao cooperated with investigators and provided information about Chinese intelligence tradecraft. These cases are not isolated incidents. Federal Bureau of Investigation and Naval Criminal Investigative Service counterintelligence officers have identified dozens of suspicious approaches to United States military personnel. These approaches occurred through social media platforms, particularly those popular in China. Many service members reported being contacted by individuals claiming to be researchers. Other individuals claimed to be naval enthusiasts, defense industry professionals, or recruiters. They offered lucrative consulting opportunities. In some cases, these approaches are legitimate. In others, they are intelligence operations designed to identify potential sources and gradually recruit them. The Wei prosecution also highlights vulnerabilities in how the military grants security clearances. It monitors personnel with access to sensitive information. Wei received his clearance as part of his technical rating. The background investigation apparently did not identify factors that should have raised red flags about his suitability for access to classified materials. Once aboard the United States ship Essex, Wei's access to technical manuals and restricted computer systems was not closely monitored. He was able to download or photograph dozens of sensitive documents without triggering any internal security alerts. His communications with a foreign intelligence officer went undetected for 18 months. They only came to light through a Federal Bureau of Investigation and Naval Criminal Investigative Service investigation. This was not through Navy internal security measures. These systemic failures point to the need for better monitoring of personnel with security clearances. More sophisticated detection of unauthorized access to classified systems is also needed. Improved training on recognizing and reporting suspicious foreign contacts is also essential. Junior enlisted personnel often have significant technical access. However, they have relatively low salaries and limited financial security. This makes them attractive targets for foreign intelligence services. These services are willing to offer cash payments for information. The military and intelligence community have responded to cases like Wei's by increasing emphasis on counterintelligence training. Service members now receive more detailed briefings on foreign intelligence threats. They also learn about the tactics used to recruit sources. Furthermore, they are taught the legal and personal consequences of espionage. Social media use by military personnel is receiving greater scrutiny. Warnings are issued about accepting contact requests from unknown individuals. This is particularly true for those claiming interest in defense topics. Training and awareness can only accomplish so much. Junior military personnel have access to sensitive information and face financial pressures. Foreign intelligence services are willing to pay for that information. Therefore, the recruitment threat will continue. Wei's case proves that some individuals will choose to betray their country for relatively modest sums of money. What made Wei willing to commit espionage for just $12,000 over 18 months? Prosecutors never fully answered that question. Wei's motivations may have been primarily financial, driven by a desire to supplement his $55,000 Navy salary. Or perhaps he felt some lingering loyalty to China despite becoming an American citizen. His mother's encouragement to continue spying suggests that family and cultural ties may have influenced his decision. It is also possible that Wei did not fully grasp the severity of what he was doing until it was too late to stop. Once he accepted the first payment, he was compromised. Once Big Brother Andy had evidence of Wei providing classified information, Wei could not easily end the relationship. He faced the risk of exposure. The Chinese intelligence officer may have used both financial incentives and implicit threats to keep Wei providing information. Whatever his motivations, Wei made a choice that destroyed his life. At 25 years old, he faces the prospect of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. He will never serve in the military again. He will never hold a security clearance again. His American citizenship will likely be revoked upon completion of his sentence. Every opportunity he might have had is gone, forfeited for $12,000. On December 1st, 2025, Wei will stand before Judge Marilyn L. Huff for sentencing. Federal sentencing guidelines for espionage cases are severe. The 2 espionage convictions alone each carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. Prosecutors will almost certainly argue for a sentence at or near that maximum. They will emphasize the 18-month duration of Wei's espionage. The prosecution will also highlight the volume and sensitivity of information he compromised. Furthermore, they will note the calculated operational security measures he used. His admission that he knew he was committing espionage will also be emphasized. The prosecution will argue that Wei deserves no leniency. His betrayal of his oath, his uniform, and his adopted country warrants the harshest punishment available under law. They will point to the potential harm to national security. This includes the compromise of technical information about the United States ship, Essex, and similar vessels. It also gave an advantage to Chinese military planners. Defense attorney Sean Jones will argue for a more lenient sentence. He will cite Wei's youth, his lack of prior criminal history, his cooperation after arrest, and his apparent remorse. Jones will likely argue that Wei's actions, while serious, did not result in documented harm to specific operations or personnel. He will emphasize that Wei provided information about an aging ship using outdated technology. This will be an attempt to minimize the national security impact. However, Judge Huff will have to balance those arguments against the severity of Wei's crimes. She must also consider the need to deter others from committing similar offenses. Espionage sentences typically run into decades. Wei received credit for time served since his August 2023 arrest. He may also receive potential credit for cooperation or acceptance of responsibility. Even so, Wei faces the strong likelihood of dying in federal prison. The United States ship Essex continues to serve as part of America's amphibious warfare capability. The ship has returned to full operational status following the overhaul and modifications that were underway during Wei's espionage activities. Navy officials have conducted a comprehensive security review of all technical information Wei compromised. They have changed procedures, updated security protocols, and modified certain systems. This was to mitigate whatever advantage Chinese intelligence gained from Wei's betrayal. The other sailors who served aboard the Essex with Wei have had to grapple with the knowledge that one of their shipmates was a spy. The sailor who knew Wei had been asked to spy did not report it to authorities. This person may face disciplinary action. However, no public information indicates that person was criminally charged. The Navy has used Wei's case as a teaching example in security briefings throughout the fleet. Counterintelligence officers show photos of Wei. They describe how he was recruited and what he provided to Chinese intelligence. They also describe what consequences he now faces. The message is clear. This can happen to anyone, and the consequences are devastating. Some observers have criticized the relatively small amount of money Chinese intelligence paid Wei for such sensitive information. $12,000 over 18 months averages to less than $700 per month. For that modest sum, Wei provided dozens of technical manuals, hundreds of photos, and extensive operational information. From China's perspective, Wei was an extraordinarily cost-effective intelligence source. This payment structure raises questions. Other service members might be providing information for similar or even smaller amounts. These activities could be flying under the radar of counterintelligence operations. Such operations might focus on larger financial transactions. The Wei case also raises uncomfortable questions about the insider threat within the military and intelligence community. Security systems are designed primarily to prevent external intrusions. They keep foreign adversaries from hacking into networks or physically accessing restricted areas. However, when the threat comes from inside, from someone with legitimate access and a valid security clearance, those external defenses are irrelevant. Wei did not have to hack anything. He did not have to break into any facilities. He simply used his authorized access to collect information and pass it to a foreign intelligence officer. Detecting and preventing insider threats requires different approaches than defending against external attacks. It requires monitoring how personnel use their access. This monitoring looks for patterns that indicate someone is collecting information beyond their required duties. It requires creating a culture where service members look out for each other. They report suspicious behavior rather than ignoring warning signs. It also requires robust financial monitoring to identify service members who are living beyond their means or receiving unexplained income. Critically, it requires consequences severe enough to deter potential insiders from making the choice Wei made. The espionage statute under which Wei was convicted carries penalties up to and including life in prison. Congress recognized that betraying national defense information to foreign powers represents one of the most serious crimes an American can commit. Wei's sentence will send a message. It will show whether those penalties are just theoretical or actually applied to those who choose to become spies. The case against Jin Chao Patrick Wei stands as a stark reminder that the era of espionage is not over. While much public attention focuses on cybersecurity threats, state-sponsored hacking operations also exist. Traditional human intelligence collection remains a critical tool for foreign intelligence services. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and other adversaries continue to recruit Americans. They seek those with access to sensitive information. They use money, ideology, coercion, or ego as motivational factors. The United States Navy, with its advanced technology and global presence, represents an attractive target for these intelligence operations. Naval vessels like the USS Essex are floating repositories of classified information. This includes weapons systems, communications networks, and operational procedures. Every sailor with a security clearance becomes a potential vector for information to leak to adversaries. This occurs if that sailor chooses to betray the trust placed in them. Wei made that choice. He responded to an approach on social media. He then engaged in conversation with a Chinese intelligence officer. Wei agreed to provide classified information for money. He spent 18 months systematically betraying his country. His trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. They convicted him on 6 of 7 counts. Now he awaits sentencing on December 1st, 2025. He faces the prospect of life in federal prison. A machinist's mate, who made approximately $55,000 a year, sold Navy secrets for $12,000. This math does not make sense from any rational perspective. However, espionage rarely makes rational sense. It is a choice driven by a complex mix of financial pressure, ego, ideology, naivety, coercion, or simple greed. Whatever Wei's motivations, his choice destroyed him. For anyone watching this documentary, the lesson should be clear. If you hold a security clearance, if you have access to classified or sensitive information, foreign intelligence services will target you. They will approach you through social media, professional networking sites, or academic conferences. They will use any other venue where they can make contact. They will present themselves as friendly, interested, and admiring. They will offer you opportunities, money, and recognition. If you engage with them, and if you provide them information, you will eventually face the choice Wei faced. This choice involves continuing to commit espionage while living in fear of discovery. Alternatively, you can stop and risk being exposed for what you have already done. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and counterintelligence professionals want you to make a different choice. If you are approached by someone requesting sensitive information, report it immediately to your security officer. If you are in the Navy or Marines, report it to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. If you are in the Air Force or Space Force, report it to the Office of Special Investigations. Soldiers should report it to Army Counterintelligence. Anyone can report it to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Making that report might feel uncomfortable. You might worry about overreacting. However, security professionals would much rather receive 100 reports about legitimate contacts. They prefer this over missing the one report about an actual intelligence operation. If you have already made Way's mistake, and if you have already provided information you should not have, it is not too late to report it. You can still cooperate with investigators. Wen Hangzhou, the other Navy sailor arrested the same day as Wei, cooperated with authorities. He received a 27-month sentence. Wei did not cooperate. He went to trial and now faces life in prison. The difference between those outcomes is stark. This case will continue to unfold on December 1st, 2025, when Judge Huff sentences Wei. Legal observers expect a sentence of multiple decades in federal prison. It could quite possibly be life without parole. This is due to the severity of the espionage convictions. It also sends a deterrent message to others who might consider similar betrayals. Wei will likely appeal his convictions. He will argue that some evidence should have been suppressed or that the jury instructions were flawed. Those appeals will probably fail. The evidence against Wei was overwhelming. It was presented professionally by experienced prosecutors. A jury that took its duties seriously evaluated it. The conviction will almost certainly stand. Jinqiao Patrick Wei will spend the rest of his life paying for his decision. He sold Navy secrets to China for $12,000. As you watch this documentary and learn about this case, consider sharing it with others. If you found this information valuable, you may think others should understand the reality of modern espionage. They should also know the consequences of betraying your country. If so, hit the like button below this video. Subscribe to this channel. You will be notified when we release new documentaries about espionage, national security, and true crime. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts about Wei's case. Do you think the sentence he is likely to receive is appropriate? What could the Navy have done differently to prevent this betrayal? How should the military balance the need for personnel to have access to technical information? This must be balanced with the need to prevent that information from being compromised. These questions do not have easy answers, but they are worth discussing. The insider threat will continue as long as foreign intelligence services want American secrets. They are also willing to pay for them. Understanding cases like Wei's helps us recognize the tactics used to recruit sources. It also helps us see the warning signs that someone may be compromised. Finally, it reveals the devastating consequences that follow when someone chooses money over loyalty.